What we're doing today, as you can see, is we're going to relate the concept of grounding to functional integration lessons. So right now we have a skeleton lying on the table. And what we can do to start our functional integration lesson, we can think about what parts of the skeleton are contacting the table and what parts are lifting the table. So we're thinking of grounding that way, scanning. And I'm going to look first. So I'm just kind of looking, seeing what's off the table, what's on the table. And yeah, and if you want to get up, feel free to get up and look around. What looks like, what part of the skeleton looks like it may be pushing the most? What part looks like it may be lifted the furthest away from the table? And the nice thing about the skeleton is it's pretty easy to see. Now, the next thing we can do, and this is something that me and Leora would have us do a lot, is confirm what you see with your hands. So I'm looking and I'm seeing, like with how the heels are touching, I'm seeing that there's a lot more of the left heel touching than the right heel touching. So I can kind of confirm this with my hands, and putting my hands, it's like, oh, yeah, I can really feel the outside of this ankle is really on the table, and these two ankles aren't on the table. They're a little off the table, and there's a little space here. And then checking the spots with the knees, and I can feel there's more space under the left knee than the right knee, and the left knee's turned out a little bit. The right knee's kind of up toward the ceiling. The left knee is turned out a little bit and then closer to the table. So we're using the concept of the ground to see how the person is organized in this lying position. And the nice thing about the skeleton is you can see it's far from perfect. This guy has issues, like most of us. Okay, moving ahead. Sometimes it's hard to feel the hip joints and by the hip joints. But what you can do is you can see, if one side of the pelvis is a little further off the table than the other one, that gives you information. You can feel how much the lower back is. And I can feel that one side of the lower back is much further off the table than the other side of the lower back. And another area of interest. Did I start recording? Yeah, I think I did. Another area of interest, right? The space between the two shoulders and the table. They're both off the table quite a bit, but this one's off the table and closer to the person's middle than this one is. And then we can kind of feel the neck. So now I have a bit of an understanding using the table as a gauge of the beginning position of how this person is at this moment, how they're organized. And then we can compare that at the end of the lesson to see what's changed or not changed. Keeping in mind grounding, this is actually an FI that I had in my training by Jerry Carson. And I was wondering what he was doing at the time, but now that I understand grounding, I have a little better idea of what he was doing. And basically, all what he did was just felt how I was contacting the ground. And I'm asking a question. My question is, does one side find the ground easier than the other side? and I can feel it. I can feel that this leg, this heel, just goes right to the ground much easier than that one. And then I can do the same thing with the lower leg. Which side's finding the ground easier? This one. Finding the ground easier than that one. Comparing the two sides. The upper leg, same thing. I can feel this hip finding the ground real easy, and this hip takes a little bit more. You know, just the slightest pressure, and I can feel the contact solid with the ground, and I have to do a little bit more on this side to feel the same thing.
Tom, will you say right or left?
Right side, left side.
Yes, but I meant instead of saying this side and that side,
I can say right or left,
okay, thank you.
but yeah, skeleton's left side, my right hand. And again, you know, the pelvis, finding the left side of the skeleton super easy. And then if I find the same thing here, there's more movement, more space to go. If it's somebody that you worked with a lot and they're used to you touching their ribs, you can do the same thing here. But, you know, if it's a new client, they may get ticklish or something. So maybe you want to wait and let that one go. I wouldn't do this because look how far these shoulders are off the ground, off the table. Right here, we're getting into a war. So what I would do instead is I would just feel it from here. Because you can see all of this is really tight and it's pulling all of this forward and in. And if I push on that, that's kind of creating a bit of a tug of war. So, but I can see the elbows on the ground, so I can say, okay, which elbow is making more contact? The left elbow or the right elbow? And then you can feel, okay, what part of the back of the head is making contact? The nice thing about doing this is it gives the student a sense of feeling grounded, feeling the contact with the table, feeling secure on the table. So this is particularly valuable if you're just starting to work with somebody because it's not a lot. It's not asking too much. It's just feel the table on this side, feel the table on this side. And if you want to ask some questions, do you feel this more on the table or do you feel this more on the table? Which side are you feeling more on the table? Now, where I can go from there, I'm noticing that there's a pattern. And I can start to think about how to use the table, how to use this idea of grounding to work with the pattern. So what I can do is I can feel this, finding the table a little this way, and there's a little rotation as I find the contact right here. And you can kind of see that. So already I'm starting to work with this with the student's pattern. This hand's going a little like that toward the table, but as this goes a little toward the table, I'm finding that as I go like this hand's going a little away from the table. So I'm thinking what's going to the ground, what's going away from the ground. And then you can see we're starting to get this movement, this pattern going up through the student. And again, I can just slowly work my way up through the same pattern. Now, you see how it's going up higher? Can you see parts of the spine into the rib cage moving? And that's the idea. The idea is I'm thinking about using the ground, getting this little rolling motion on the ground. There we go. We're starting to get it toward the head. There we go. You can see the chin moving a little bit. So now we're starting to work with the students' preferred movement. And you can see there's scoliosis, there's twisting, there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. But when I think about I can move easy to the table, what's moving away from the table easy, you can see we're going with this pattern and moving the pelvis in this pattern. Now you can see we're getting a whole lot more toward the head, the neck. And that's what I'm thinking. This left side of the pelvis finds the table easy, and this right side is just coming off a little bit. I could even see how this is. Okay, and as we continue to work up,
Tom, are you putting your hands on top of the skeleton or underneath the skeleton, or are you moving the
I mean,
skeleton?
I'm kind of around the skeleton, kind of like, do you see? I'm kind of like on both sides of the bone and I'm rolling it. And you see how I'm just kind of rolling him into the ground a little bit with his hand?
So
Kind of,
you would do the same thing to a person who is lying down there?
yeah. I could do the same thing with the person because I can, and if you want to see it on somebody, we can have somebody on the table. And then but with the person, we may need to find some skeletal markings like here, right? Someplace where you can get a little easier to. But if you let your hands sink and then roll a little bit, you could even do this on top of the muscle. Okay. So we're working our way up, and as we said, these shoulder blades are just off the table. So rather than trying to bring it toward the table, what I'm thinking is, if I bring the shoulder blade a little forward away from the table, and I can feel it this way. This way is easier than that way. So now I can kind of feel what's going a little away from the table, the right side, and I can feel the left side goes a little toward the table, which is kind of similar. And then eventually I could get up toward the head. Yeah, I can think which side. First thing I'm doing is I'm just letting my hands sink on the head and I'm feeling the table under the person's head. So I can feel the skull and I can feel the table underneath the skull. And now I'm just feeling which way is easier. Feels like this way. What's going to the ground, what's going away, and how far is the movement going down? I can feel this getting into the shoulders and getting down into the spine a little bit there. So the nice thing is, once we worked with this pattern and we can feel this pattern going all the way through the person, I'm just going to do it through the shoulder blades. There we go. Now I can see the legs moving and I can see it going down to feet. Once we get the pattern going through nicely, and maybe I want to come back starting with the head. Then I can start, with the easy, what we've been doing with the pattern, go back to neutral. And then pay attention to it coming back and then seeing if I can find the table on the other side. Think about what part of the head goes, rolls into the table, what part lifts. There we go. And now we're starting to get some movement in the rib cage into the arms this way. All right, we can come back to the shoulder blades. We had this movement like this. You can go back to neutral. And then we can slowly start to see if we can find the pattern going on the opposite way.
Tom, why did you choose to start from the right side?
Because this is what I found when I was coming up. When we started at the feet and we went from the feet to the lower leg, the upper leg, the pelvis, this was the easy movement. Mm. And then as we got up into here, I found that the arms were easier this way, and I found that this shoulder blade was easy. So when I'm coming back, so we got everything really going nicely to this one side, right? We worked the whole pattern here. So now we're working on how can we find this to the other side? Okay, because that's what he tends not to do. So rather than just trying to take this side to the table, I'm just coming back here and finding this. And by finding this and paying attention at how I'm coming back with the right shoulder blade, that's going to help me. There we go. He needs work on here. But that's going to, and actually, from what I'm feeling with him, this doesn't want to go, right? But I can work from this side. So now I can feel as I bring this shoulder blade forward and as the ribs roll a little bit to the right, I can feel the shoulder blade and rib cage pushing against this hand. And by feeling it push against this hand, now I'm feeling some differentiation. I'm just keeping this in place. And then now what I can feel is now I have a little bit more play on this side.
Is the differentiation from the ribs?
Yeah, because the shoulder blade's just going to rest on top of the ribs. And what you may find is one shoulder blade slides really easy on the ribs, but the other one doesn't. So what you can do, you can move what moves, but you can also stop what stops. Okay. So what I did, because this wasn't really doing anything and not willing to move, I just kind of kept it in place. And as I moved here, I can feel the rib moving under the shoulder blade here. Mm-hmm. So we're getting some differentiation there. Yeah, we'll have you guys do this with each other. And then hopefully, once you get the differentiation there, then you'll feel how this shoulder blade can move a little bit easier. This is just one strategy of using the ground. If I wanted to, I could come here and I can think this toward the ground. I'm bringing this toward the ground. One side going down, the other side going up a little bit. So we can play with it the same way here. There's so many different ways you can work with somebody, but the idea is what's going toward the table, what's going away from the table. Right, and again, we found that this was super, super easy. So now we're just finding. Here we go. We're just seeing if we can find the other side. So now, rather than just one pattern being available, now we're feeling and seeing. Look like his pelvis changed a little, Bobby. Sometimes you can get a change in this guy.
Yeah, I think the left
Yeah.
side's changed. Yeah.
Yeah, so we got a little change going there. You know, same thing. Like Rita said, where can you put your hands? This is a nice place right here. You can go right under the tibia and the fibia, and it's like a little hold here. You know, so I could even think about finding table on this side. Now I'm thinking about finding the table on the other side. Yeah. Same thing, we can work on the feet. And you can see, you know, now we're starting working on getting this on going the other way. And the nice thing about being able to do this, if this guy's scoliosis is really, really bothering him, putting your hands in the back area might bring his attention too much there. So the nice thing about this is you can work on creating changes.
You can't see what you're doing.
You can't see what I'm doing? Okay,
No.
let me get my leg out of the way.
Okay.
You see how I'm working with the feet into the hips, into the pelvis?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you can see that's moving the spine. And we're actually getting the spine more into a neutral position through the feet, which is nice because if somebody has issues with their spine, you're helping them get some movement in the spine, some motion in the spine without bringing their attention to the spine. You're kind of under the radar, which is nice. And now if we look at his spine's not as curved. So we did get a nice change there. But that's the main idea. I just picked an idea of using the ground to find his pattern, finding out what the pattern is, slowly just working up to get the pattern to go all the way from the feet toward the head. So it felt like everything was organized and moving together because once you get the whole skeleton linked in as one, making that connection, now you're opening the door to other possibilities and movements. And once I got there, then, you know, I wasn't going to get greedy and try to do everything. My idea was, how can we find the opposite? How can we reverse the movement and go with the reversing of the movement so the other side can find stability on the table and rest on the table and feel solid on the table. And then we can go through the whole process of that. And then if I feel, you know, if I get down here and if I feel like now you can see I'm kind of working through the feet again, and you can feel, okay, we're getting it this way, and now we're getting it that way. And we're getting his head moving a little bit. It's going all the way through. Things look like they're going okay. They feel pretty smooth. You know, now he's cooked. It's like the little tab coming up on the turkey. You know, everything's going through in a really nice way. Let's see what happens when he gets up off the table, standing. And what you can do is you can pick a reference movement and standing. I didn't do that. The one that Mia uses a lot is just standing and turning, comparing turning to look over the shoulder on one side, comparing it to looking over on the other side. And then at the end, you can continue that again and see what's changed. And then if they don't quite have it, if there's one part of them that they're forgetting, or if they're still shifting the weight the same way and not really discovering how they can shift into the opposite leg, then you can start asking questions and making it into like a little mini ATM to help them learn that missing piece that they don't really get. That kind of makes sense, Bobby?
Yes, yes, it does.
Yeah. So how are you guys? Does that make sense to you all? Rita and
No,
Marie?
the last bit doesn't. So when you put your hands underneath the leg and say, hey, how do you turn to the right, and come back and say, how do you turn to the left? Is that what you mean?
Oh, yeah. So here, here we're just, I'm thinking, how does the right side find the table? And it is like a little turning movement. And then how does this left side find the table? And there's this little turning movement happening here. So once I get here, then, the FI kind of did its job. We made connections, things are going through. But once you get somebody standing, right, all bets are off. So there's no way you're going to know what they're going to do until they actually do it. So for me, that's fascinating, is to see what can happen on the table. And then when they stand and do it, to see what's integrating, to see what's going. And then, but also to see what other parts may be missed, what they're not getting, what's not happening. And that's what Mia did just so amazing. If you ever have a chance, hopefully we can get some more of her videos. But when you see what she does when the person's off the table, and Feldenkrais spoke of it, he said that's harvesting the lesson. So if you think that this guy is a prized crop, all this stuff we're doing here is the planning, the watering, the fertilizing, the nurturing, right? Getting everything to grow and happen. But it's when you're off the table and what you do with the student when they're off the table, that's when you're harvesting it, right? That's when you're picking the apples or the almonds. That's when you can harvest all the benefits of the lesson. So we'll spend a whole study group on that because that's important.
So I think that the importance is, again, by using the ground and having them lie down, and we're doing that, they're getting a sense of what moves. So then by the time they stand up, there's some reference of understanding what moved on the table, and then they can put it into some kind of language when they're standing. You can then have them use their feet as to when they're going in or out or something, but there's a little reference point of what they felt when they were on the table, somewhat.
Exactly. That's a great point, Ronnie, because when you think of it, right, when we're lying on the table, you can feel so much more of yourself than you can when you're standing doing anything. You can feel what the back of the pelvis is doing. You can feel what your shoulders are doing on the table. You can notice how your ribs are changing and moving on the table. So it just gives us a more complete sense of ourselves being able to use the table. And it's very important in Moshe. We have to remember he wrote a book called Higher Judo Groundwork. It's all about using the ground as a judicon. Is that how you say it? I don't know what it is. But yeah. And judo, I can remember one time I had a friend who had a friend who knew judo well. And we were messing around, which was a mistake on my part because I didn't know what I was doing. But not only was I wrestling against this guy, I was wrestling against the ground. He knew how to use the ground, so he could really tie me up. And he knew how to use the ground, so I couldn't budge him. So Moshe was very aware of what you can do with the ground, how you can use the ground in various ways. And that's a very important part of his FI. So we can just remember how we can use the table, we can use the ground to help make things happen and help the person's sense of how they're moving against us. Yeah, good point, Ronnie.
So I have another thing, because I found that with myself interesting, and we didn't quite do that with this. The skeleton is going to the hand, the wrist, and where the wrist is even rotating the skeleton at the wrist, and see how that affects the elbow, the lower arm, or having do flexion and extension of the wrist on the skeleton, and that how that would affect the shoulder or whatever.
That is, the cool thing is practitioners, it's what you see, it's what the pattern is, what you think may be the most helpful to this person at the time, or what you may find really interesting. So yeah, Ronnie, if you saw something going on with the wrist, and as you can see, there is something funky going on with the wrist because he's palms up on the left side and he's palms down on the right side. So you may hone in on that and say, that's really interesting. Why, what is there about his pattern? And if you look up at the shoulder and where it is or where it's not at the shoulder girdle, that kind of tells you a lot right there. But all these things are little clues to give you an opening, an in, where you're deciding to start and where you want to put your intention is on the lesson. So that's the practitioner's call.
Okay, I have another question in relationship to ground and all, because of the relationship with the heel, the knee, and the hip. How would you see how that pattern is going by using the grounding or whatever, what you're
Yeah.
doing?
Excuse me. And we did that earlier. I just found which way was easiest on the ground, and it was this way. And by accentuating this, I was just watching the pattern go up through. So just by thinking of the ground and what finds the ground easiest, and by going with it a little bit more, I'm just looking up the skeleton. And because we did so much work on this guy, it's going all the way through to his head. So as we do something, we use what we're feeling, we use what we're seeing, and we're just saying what's happening, what's not happening, because that's going to inform you where you're going to go. If for some reason the movement's stopping in the lower back, then I know, okay, well, there's movement here, here, and in the pelvis, but there's something holding here. There's something not happening here. So maybe what I do, if I see the movement stop here, I just go right below where it stopped, and then I start working with this part a little bit more. And then maybe that's enough to get things going and moving again.